Nice to see everybody for our weekly Zera Shimshon class on the Parashat. This week is Parashat Vaera, the second Parashat in the second book of Moses. Okay? 2 of 2. As we all know, tonight is Sunday night. Normally we do our class Wednesday night. Going back to next week, we will resume our regular Wednesday night schedule. This week, since it's yeshiva break and many will be away out of town or have family coming in from out of town, so we're doing a Sunday night. Now, Sunday night sounds great, but Sunday night's also pretty tough. It's tough on everybody. Maybe tough on you. Maybe you didn't have enough time to review your parsha, but guess what? Me too. So you're going to help me tonight, and we're going to really reveal some amazing secrets that we find in this week's Torah portion. So we're going to give a quick recap of last week's Torah portion, which was amazing and interesting in and of itself, and then we're going to jump into this week's Torah portion. So, last week we read about the regular course of life of the 12 tribes passing on. So, Jacob passes the week before. Last week is when the 12 tribes pass, and the whole generation changes. Guess what happens when there's a new generation? There are new leaders. And there was one chocham, one genius, who wanted to turn a blind eye and say, I don't know who Joseph is. So was he the same king? Was he a new king? He was definitely manipulating his powers to forget who Joseph was for his own political agenda, obviously. Okay? After the rise of a new king, the Jews start multiplying, and there are many thousands swarming all over Egypt. We spoke about this last week. So, the king of Egypt, Paro, and his advisors come up that they have to find a way to demise the Jewish people, and they wanted to start killing out the boys. They did so, didn't really work. Part of it worked, part of it didn't work. Then they increased the level of the bondage. We know about Moshe's whole episode. We spent great time about that yesterday. And last week. And towards the end of last week's Torah portion, while Moses is revealed to by God, God and him are negotiating. Should he go? Should he not go? He's saying repeatedly all over, I can't speak. I'm not the one. I'm not the chosen one. I have a lisp. It's not me. And God's telling him, who gave mouth to man? Who gave the ability for anyone to speak? I did, so I will have you speak. And because Moses kept on knocking that point home, God said, you know what? I'm not going to give you a mouth to speak. I'll have your brother Aaron do it for you. He'll take that merit. And so on. That was the continuation of last week's Parsha. Ends off with Moses and Aaron reuniting. Aaron with great joy for his younger brother, even though his younger brother was raised up on a higher rank. They come to the Jewish people. They prove that Moses is the rightful leader and the deliverer of the Jewish people. They come to Paro and they tell Paro, and Moses is thinking, this is going to be the end of my story. Finally, let my people go. And now the story really starts. Instead of it being the end of the story, it's really the beginning of the story. So last week was really a cliffhanger. Whoever wrote this episode really did a good job at keeping our attention, right? Because last week, we think towards the end, Paro's going to say, okay, no problem. But how does it end off? Paro says, absolutely not. Get lost. No chance. And he strengthens the bondage, the burden, the slavery on the Jewish people, making it so much harder. And guess what? It's not too hard to make this happen, but the Jews are now not happy at Moshe and Aaron. So it's really turning exactly not the way Moshe anticipated this. He knew that it was not going to be easy. He didn't feel like he was cut out for the job. And now, unfortunately, his initial feelings are coming true. That was the end of last week's Torah portion. This week, God now comes and he says, Vaidaber Elokim el Moshe. God comes and he speaks in a strong terminology. We know God has two main names. We're going to speak about a third one today. But there's two main names. There's God's name of Yud Ke Vav Ke, which is the name we pronounce as Amonai, just with the Daled, okay? That's the name of compassion and mercy. And then there is Elokim, which is din, which is judgment. And it's very interesting when we learn the scripture to pay attention to how is God being referred to, is how God referring to himself. It's by no chance that right at the beginning of this week's Torah portion, God is coming out as Elokim, din, for two reasons. Number one, he was speaking very strong to Moses. He says, Moses, you're not packing your bags and going up anywhere. Now is when the party starts. Now is when we're going to teach them a lesson. And very strong. And secondly, Paro's going to get the whipping of his life with din, with judgment. So, God comes and reveals himself as Elokim. Now, having said that, to follow in this week's Torah portion, then we're going to have the snake trick, okay? Then we're going to have the 7 of the 10 plagues, and the subsequent 3 plagues are going to take place at the next week's Torah portion, Parashat Bo. The next week, Beshalach, is when the Jewish people emerge, they leave, and they go into the Sea of Reeds, and then they sing the Az Yashir, which we'll speak about. That's moving forward. Just so we get a quick synopsis and a bird's eye view of what's taking place in Jewish history and the episodes that our Torah is speaking to us these weeks. Okay. Next. The Zera Shimshon analyzes the beginning of this week's Torah portion and says, it's quite interesting. He actually quotes the Zera Berech. It sounds like the Zera Shimshon, completely different author, okay? The Zera Berech, not a common book. The Zera Shimshon's the only rabbi that I've ever seen quote this book, okay? And he quotes the book saying that we'll analyze right now. If we look at the beginning of this week's Torah portion, the Torah is giving us no less, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 reasons to why God is deciding to redeem the Jewish people, to take them out of their slavery. So anyone who has a Chumash, if you don't, we have some there at the table, on the shelf. We're on page 318. This is the beginning of Parashat Vaera. Okay, let's just read along so we get into the gist of what the Parashat is telling us. So, Vaydaber Elokim el Moshe, so God speaks to Moses, V'emer lav ani Hashem, and he tells him, I'm God. Okay? Now, Vaera el Avraham, he says, and I revealed myself to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Be'el Shaddai, with the name of Kel Shaddai, which is one of God's names also, and we're going to really learn what that name really means. Ushmi Hashem, and he says, and my name is God, so there's a lot going on over here. Lo nodati lahem, and I revealed myself to them, but I didn't reveal myself to them the way I'm going to reveal myself to you, and to the way the world is going to see, including Egypt and the Jewish people coming up now over the next 10 months. And furthermore, I made a covenant. I made a pact, an oath with them, itam, latet lahem et eretz Canaan, to give them and their descendants the land of Canaan, et eretz migorem asher garu ba, the land that they lived in. Almost. V'gam ani shamati et na'akat b'nei Israel, and I also heard the cries of the Jewish people, Hashem Yitzram avidim otam, that the Egyptians are inflicting upon them and working them hard. Va'izkor et beriti, and then God says, and I remember now the covenant. So, over here, the Zera Berech explains that there are 4 reasons why God is redeeming now the Jewish people. The first is because, as it says right at the end of the first pasuk, Ani Hashem, because I am God. Meaning that God is trustworthy to fulfill whatever he says before a promise, before an oath. Just for the very fact that God says, now is time for the Jewish people to go, God is trustworthy that he can carry that out. Is that beyond him? Obviously not. Okay, that's the first. Number 2 is from the very fact that God says he revealed himself to our patriarchs in the name of El Shaddai. Okay? This was now a promise. So it was just first trusting God, Ani Hashem, then Kel Shaddai, that is, God is coming and he is saying, with this name I will reveal myself and redeem the Jewish people with this name, something specific about this name. Third is when he says, I made a covenant, so covenant, so trusted, promise, covenant, and then he ends up by saying, and by the way, the Jewish people have their own merit, they deserve being redeemed. So the Zera Shimshon looks at this and he says, 4 reasons? Why couldn't it just be one? Don't each of them sound good or stand alone, right? God's trusted. That's good. He promised. That's good. He made an oath to our patriarchs. Hey, that's great. The Jewish people, the Jewish people, they deserved it. So why do I need all four? One, maybe two, but all four? So that's where the Zera ends off, and then the Zera Shimshon goes and explains exactly why all four were necessary, because one actually comes to answer up an issue with the previous. Okay, so the issue with the first one of God being trusted for the Jewish people to believe in Him or to say, yeah, let's go with that, there was a little bit of an issue with that. The reason why God was supposed to be trusted for redeeming the Jewish people was because, again, of the merit of our patriarchs. What if the Jewish people would not, being descendants of the patriarchs, would not fully comply and prescribe to the lifestyle, i.e. the commandments and the morals and ethics of our patriarchs? What if they would not follow exactly in line with that? Do they still deserve to trust in God for saving them? The Zera Shimshon suggests not, because they're not the same. We know that even when the Jewish people leave Egypt, then angels come. This is at the splitting of the sea, right? We just mentioned that. By the splitting of the sea is splitting, and before it split, the angels come down and they say, God, we don't see why we need to split this sea. God says, do it for the Jews, do it for the Bnei Israel. They come down, they look, they say, these ones are idol worshippers, and these ones are idol worshippers. By the way, that midrash is one of the great sources that we know that the Jewish people really stooped very low, even in idolatry. Because when it came to the time, it was like the moment of decision. The angels themselves said they're all idol worshippers. So we know that they stooped in idolatry. They stooped in immorality. They did not even, we said last week, they did not even circumcise their boys. So they're not following in the path of their patriarchs. So for that reason, the Zera Shimshon says, trusting in God alone may not have been good enough, even though God says it. They needed something else. And what was that? That was a promise. Now, the nature of this promise was a promise made with the name of God, El Shaddai. The God who is called Shaddai, Shin, Dalid, and Yud. Okay? What does this word mean? Where did this word come from? So, anyone who is quite fluent in the Hebrew language, dai means to stop. Enough. Very good. Stop. Enough. Now, this is getting deep into the creation of the world, and we're going to make this very brief, although we can expound tremendously on this, that when God created the world, of course we know Bereshit bara Elokim, right? With that name of God, Et hashamayim v'et haaretz. And then we have, as we mentioned, after 26 times, then we have Yud Kei Vav Kei, we have Hashem's name of compassion, right? We learned that all the way back in Bereshit. We know that those two names were definitely involved in the creation of the world. His judgment side of his name, and also his compassion and mercy side of his name. But there's another name that was involved, and that was the Shin Daled Yud Di Shakai. Why? Because the way God, and this fits very well with science, anyone who's scientific or scientifically inclined or enjoys, whether you like it, call it evolution, which we don't really believe in, or maybe the dispersion of the universe, the creation of the universe. The way the universe works, and it's still working today, is it's always expanding. Okay? There's constant growth. So the way God created the world was He brought all of these great forces and elements together, and He put them together, and then they were expanding at a very high velocity and high speed until God says, die! Stop! Now we know today that it's not a complete and full stop, it's still expanding. Thank God to that, because that's what keeps the world spinning. But the very fact that God came and said, die, stop, to the process of creation is what allows the world to be livable and allows us as human beings and other creatures to live on the world. So this die, this stop, was actually really a start. Says the Zera Shimshon that God saw in the future, obviously, that the Jewish people were going to accept the Torah. And we know that the Torah was given to the world, with the world being created on condition that the Jewish people will accept the Torah. Am I saying something new? No? I hope we get this. Okay, let me just take a step back. I'm getting a couple stairs. Like this. when God created the world, really the Torah should have been given then. We know the Torah was created before the world was created, right? 1,000 generations before Moses, which would be 974 generations before the world was created, because Moses was number 26 in the genealogy, in the descendants, from Adam all the way till Moses, okay? So 1,000 generations. So the Torah definitely preceded the world. But the world was created and put on like a standby till the year 2448, until the Jewish people will finally stand at the foot of Mount Sinai and accept the Torah. If they would have not accepted the Torah, the whole world would have went back to Tov Avo, complete and utter nothingness, okay? The Zera Shimshon says, look how perfect this fits. God knows and sees that the Jewish people are going to accept the Torah. That fact that they're able to accept the Torah is going to allow the world to continue going. The word spinning and being alive, the name Shaddai was God's very name, that at the end of creation, he says, die, stop, now let the world continue or commence to exist. Because we need to stop that expansion of that high velocity which is unlivable. So the very fact that God is now coming and saying that with the name of Shaddai, which was the creation of the world, the allowance to inhabit the world, and the Jewish people accepting the Torah in the future, with that merit, maybe now that promise should be good enough for them to be redeemed. And to that, the Zera Shimshon says, well, maybe not. Okay? So that's step one. Step two, now we're going to have a problem with step two, now we're going to bring step three. The problem with step two is, right now the Jewish people are not meritorious to accept the Torah. Right now, they are entrenched in the impurity. They're so far from being allowed to get out. And the issue with that is, if they would have stayed in Egypt much longer, we know they would have been stuck there. Spiritually, physically, they would have been damned, literally, and there, and done. We say every year, when it comes time of Passover, coming up soon, that if God would have not taken us out of Egypt all those years ago, well, today we would still be slaves to Paro and Egypt. That's serious, that's severe. So, the Jewish people had a timeline. They were supposed to be in Egypt for 400 years. God, in his tremendous amount of mercy and compassion, he was able to cut that down to just a little more than half, to 210 years. Okay? God's coming and cutting it down to 210 years now is going to let us get into that third answer. That third reason, rather, was the idea of God making a covenant, a brit, with the forefathers. This brit is what promised Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov that their descendants will have the land of Israel, will belong to them. And only because of that brit, God said, I'm not going to keep up to my timeline of 400 years that I decreed to Abraham that they would be in exile in a foreign land. Because the Egyptians are working them super hard, harder than they deserved, all that slavery and that bondage and that torture, we're going to make it shorter for them. Why did God do that? Because he made an oath. He had a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the third. But, okay, there's still one issue with that. To what merit do the Jews have to sit back and for 10 months enjoy watching their greatest enemies and oppressors suffer at the hands of God? Right? The 10 plagues. We're going to go with the opinion that says there was 3 weeks prior to each plague. Being that there's 10 plagues, that's 10 months. 3 weeks and 1 week of a plague, that's 4 weeks, 1 month. 1 month times the 10 months. So under a year. What merit did the Jewish people have to sit back and say, it feels so good to watch the guy who used to whip us, the guy who used to spit at us, the guy who crushed us, the guy who didn't let us eat, the guy who hurt us. It feels so good to watch them suffer. And guess what? Even better, it's my God that's doing it. To what merit did they have that? We mentioned that they were really, really not at the level of really being worthy of being redeemed. So that's an issue with trusted God is still not good enough to answer that. A promise is not good enough. An oath is still not good enough. That's why the fourth reason in the beginning of this week's Torah portion, as Shimshon says, is that the Jewish people had their own merit. Their own merit allowed them to, so to say, enjoy and to view the Egyptians backing off them and really being punished by God for their mistreating them. Now, what merit did they possess? Okay, it wasn't Brit Milah, and it wasn't not worshiping idols. There was something they had. There was something that every Jew today has. Now, some Jews today, and even back then, had it deep down, hidden. You couldn't recognize it if you had a spiritual magnifying glass. You just couldn't. Others, it's just written all over them. Okay? The Zera Shimshon says, you know what every Jew had back then? They had faith. They had faith. They had this story that they come from great, great ancestors. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. God revealed himself to them. This hard exile is momentary. It's long, but it's only for this period of time. And that we will get out of this. We will go back to our homeland. Every Jew back then had that faith. No matter how far they veered off, no matter how much it looked like they were disobeying, not paying attention, worshiping idols, becoming entrenched in the Egyptian culture and society, deep down, the Zera Shimshon says, each had their faith, and that was the Jewish people's own merit. It was the merit of their faith that allowed them out. So, the lesson from this part, we have 3 parts. This is part 1. Okay? The lesson from this part is, number 1, look how exact and fair God is with the Jewish people and the Egyptians. Meaning, of course we know God tries to operate with us as His chosen people above the letter of the law. But the way we just explained these 4 different reasons really proves to us that God is still exact with us. At the end of the day, He always gives us that bonus. You know, like that nice teacher that doesn't want you to fail. So you got 5 out of the 10 questions wrong. But she's going to give you one question that's going to be a bonus that's going to magically be worth not just 1 point, so you get a 60, which is barely a pass, but it's going to give you a 70. God's like that, okay? At least, if not more. So while we're going through the motions, yes, it is very systematic. Trusted, not enough. Promise, almost, but not enough. Oath, covenant, almost, but not enough. Our own merit, our faith in God, all of that, with that extra bonus, those 4 reasons altogether are what allowed the Jewish people to come out. The Zera Shimshon says, these 4 reasons correspond to the very 4 terms of redemption that Hashem took us out with. Guess what? Out of all places in this amazing book, guess which page the 4 redemptions are on? Let's see. Oh, by the way, the same one. Okay. 318. Please open. If you have a Chumash in front of you, look at this. First one is, I'm in chapter 6, verse 6. Lachen emor levnei Israel. And therefore, go, speak to the Jewish people. Ani Hashem, I am God. Number 1, vehotzeti etchem, and God will take us out. Mitachat tzivlot Mitzrayim, out from under the suffering of the Jewish people. Number 2, vehitzalti etchem avodatam, and God saved us. Is going to save us from their slavery, from working them. Number 3, v'ga'alti, and Hashem's going to redeem us, etchem bizroa netuya, with a strong, strong hand. Ubishvatim gedolim. Number 4, v'lakachti etchem li, and God will take us li le'am, as His own nation. So these 4 reasons are right on the same page as the 4 different terminologies of exile, of redemption and salvation that God takes us as His people, as His chosen people for. And this is another reason why we find a lot of fours in the Haggadah. We have the 4 children. Here we go. We have the 4 cups, which there's so much to talk about that, but I'm just going to say this and then move on. Those 4 cups are really 4 l'chaims. Those are 4 cups that we're raising our glasses and saying, l'chaim, to our family, to our friends, to our nation, and to Hashem for giving us life, for saving us. 4 reasons, 4 terminologies, 4 sons, 4 cups. And all of this is based on the 4 reasons, as the Zera Shimshon says. To end off this segment, the Maggid Mezrich, one of the great Hasidic Rebbes, and very often something short and sweet from a Hasidic Rebbe is more powerful than an hours-long talk. So listen to the following. Before I say it, I just want to re-emphasize, what does that mean that the Jewish people had faith in Hashem, and that faith was their merit, is that they knew the address to turn to. They knew that when it was tough and hard, they cried out to Hashem. Vayitzaku el Hashem batzar lahem, as the Torah says, as King David writes in Tehillim 106. They were crying, screaming out to Hashem. That was their merit. When they were down and broken, bleeding, hurt, they knew where to turn to because their faith was strong. So listen to 3 things the Maggid Mezrich says that we need to, as adults, who may not always act like adults, but adults, learn from children. There are 3 fundamental concepts that children have that we ought to learn from. Number 1, children are always happy. Nowadays, 2020, 4-year-old comes and they say they're depressed. It's because they heard someone say something or they saw something, Children cannot be depressed. It's just not it's not a child's mentality. It's not a children's condition. As long as they're healthy, we're not talking about someone who is really not healthy. But most, 99.9% of kids, if that's the health spectrum nowadays, I don't even know anymore, a child is always happy, number 1. Number 2, a child is always busy. Children are always busy. They're either sports, or they're building something, or they're breaking something, or they're eating something, or they're driving you crazy. Whenever a child is quiet and they're seemingly not busy to us, they're busy with something else. They might be getting into trouble. Children are always busy. As adults, we always need to keep ourselves busy. When you're busy, you're out of trouble. This works, as the Chachamim tell us, specifically to men. Men need to take extra precaution to stay busy because men have a greater temptation in Yetzirah towards promiscuity and immorality. But it is a very important children's trait that us as adults need to learn, that we need to stay busy, to stay out of trouble and get on the right track, right? I'll get back to Daf Yomi, right? Daf Yomi started. We're 2 weeks into it. 2 weeks, we have 2,170, no, I'm off. So many, I think 2,177 pages, right? We're only 14 or 15 in, And any of us who's committed to it are like, we're so busy and it's taken up so much time. But by the way, that's good, because that takes away from time that's wasted elsewhere. At the end of the day, I can guarantee you, personally, I did not skip a meal, or I always skip meals, but I didn't skip an extra meal that I would not have skipped over the past 2 weeks because I'm doing Daf Yomi, I maybe missed up on a little bit of sleep, but I don't have bags under my eyes. I'm not walking around like a zombie. I'm still functioning. I got everything I had to do. Each and every one of us, when we commit to something which seems impossible and greater than us, we actually are able to fit those big shoes and end up walking in them and thriving in them. So keep oneself busy. Again, happy from a child, busy from a child. And number 3, the Maggid Mezrich says that a child knows when to cry and who to turn to. Their mommy and their daddy. We, as adults, need to be mature enough to cry. But Rabbi, it's so immature to cry. It's so childish. No. Crying is a human tendency. It's a human trait. It's something that is normal. It may not seem that in the way that the world is portraying it today, but turning to God and crying to Him is something we learn from children, something we learn from the great ancestors that we had, patriarchs, matriarchs, prophets, and kings, and all the great people. Learn to know when to cry into the right address. And it was in that merit that our ancestors, the Jews who lived in Egypt, since they knew when to cry, they were too late. But I don't want to say too late. They were late, but not too late. Okay? They were late, but at the end of the day, they cried and to the right address. We need to do the same. Okay? Always happy, always busy, and know when to turn to God and pour out our hearts. This is segment number 1. Moving on. So we said that this week the Parsha speaks about the first 7 of the 10 plagues. Okay, let's just go through the 10 plagues. It's important for us to know. This, by the way, if you take a census in most Jewish communities or most Jewish people, they have a much easier time rattling off the 10 plagues opposed to the 10 commandments, just so you know. Okay? Now, they're both very important, but I would challenge, and I don't want to say this, I would challenge anyone that would really be able to mention all 10 commandments straight and not making any mistakes, either forgetting one or putting it out of order. Most people don't. It's something which is sometimes hard to remember. But the 10 plagues everyone likes, okay? We all saw it in the movie. We all read it every year. We all pour wine and water to it at the Seder, right? It's a big to-do, okay? So let's just go and review those 10 plagues, and we're going to focus at first just on the very first plague, to see the greatness of God's hand and His calculation on the very first plague, which was dam, blood. Okay? The first plague is dam, blood. Second plague is tzfardea. Tzfardea is frogs. Along with the frogs, we know came that was the next one, but frogs we know that came with some alligators and crocodiles and all these type of ferocious reptiles, all from the Nile. Okay, that's the next. The third one is kinim. Kinim, lice. Okay, we can literally spend a whole class on each one of these. Maybe one year we'll be so bold to spend an hour on every single along the whole week, or maybe we'll over 10 years we'll do one every year. But really, every plague is special and very, very, very amazing, and maybe that's what the Pesach Seder is for. I know at our family Seder, a lot of time is spent on the plagues, along with a lot of the midrashim, because when you tell the children these stories and you bring them into it, then that's how we transmit our heritage and our tradition and our customs, our way of life. Okay, so that's dam, tzardea, kinim, arov. Okay, arov is, and there's a nice translation to it. Arov is wild beasts, okay? Animals, wild beasts, all from all over the world, all different types of habitats. Okay, the next one, 5, is dever, is pestilence. After all of those wild animals came in, do you think that God's going to just leave all of those animals in Egypt, put them in the zoos, or let them die and take their fur coats and make beautiful, stuffed animals out of them? No, absolutely not. There was a serious amount of pestilence, and everything died and spoiled in a horrible way, a very punishing way. Next was shechin, boils. That's 6. 7 is barad, hail. 8, arbe, which was locust. 9, choshek, darkness. 10, makat bechorot, the slaying of the firstborn. These are the 10. Okay. Now, the first plague, the plague of blood, had a number of very interesting and severe conditions to it and greatnesses. I'm going to just rattle off briefly some of what the Midrash tells us about the plague of blood, just so we get into the rhythm and into the mindset of what it means that the Nile River, living in Egypt over 3,000 years ago, turned to be blood. Okay, the Midrash tells us that it wasn't only the Nile River, that turned to be blood. It was all bodies of water. Now let me explain what all bodies of water mean. All bodies of water means lakes, oceans, rivers, all over the globe.
Cups of water.
Okay? cups of water, bottles of water, flasks of water, containers that were taken out even before it turned to blood. Everything turned to blood. Nobody could claim that it was a magic trick that Moses pulled on the Nile, because it was not limited to the Nile. That's the first thing. Next is even saliva turned to be blood. It was so severe. Now, Jews had water, and the Jews were also able to sell water to the Egyptians. We'll address that in a moment. The juice within fruits was also blood. It was so severe and so miraculous that imagine a person had a cup of water and 2 straws in it, and a Jew and an Egyptian would be drinking out of it at the same time. The Jew would be drinking water, and the Egyptian would be drinking blood. There was one exception. I wonder if anyone knows. There was one exception, besides for Jewish water, that water did not turn to blood. Does anyone know?
A Jew could sell it.
Well, we said that. Besides for that, I'm saying just water that did not turn to blood besides for Jewishly owned or bought water. Salt water. Wow. Okay? Now you say, why would salt water not turn to be blood? Listen to this. So if you're an Egyptian and you are now in a situation where your water source, which is your life source, your God, namely the Nile River, is now turned to blood, what are you going to do to drink? So you're going to go to fruits, you'll see that's full of blood. You're going to go try the water at the Nile River, you're going to say it's also real blood. You're going to say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to the ocean and see if there's water there. Ah, there's water. They start drinking it, and actually drinking ocean water makes them even more thirsty, so that didn't help. Then they said, you know what? The heck with it. I'm going to drink the blood. And they start drinking the blood. Any of the Egyptians who drank blood, their intestines started exploding and were full with worms and horrible things. And they died from that as well. God did all of this specifically in order to force them to buy water from the Jews, and we'll explain why in a moment. Okay? That's one thing. Did I get it all? I got it all. Okay. Why strike the Nile the first? Right? Why didn't he bring frogs first? Why didn't he bring the slaying of the firstborn first? Why did God specifically have Moses target the Nile as being the very first plague? It's a good question. So there are 4 answers. I have 4 different answers on why the Nile was targeted as the first. The first is mentioned in Rashi in our portion, chapter 7, verse 17, as well as the Midrash Tanchuma that says Egypt worshipped the Nile as a god. What a great way to start by teaching someone a lesson that their God is the first one going down, that you're living a lie, that it's a fabrication. So that was the first reason why they went there. Number 2, the Egyptians withheld the Jews from having children. They, first of all, made it very hard. They worked them very hard. When people are overworked and underpaid, they have no desire to have marital relations or, however you want to put it, bring more children into the world in such a hard situation. So what would happen is, unfortunately, women, instead of having children, would be having way more menstrual cycles, or even, God forbid, aborting children, which is obviously a product of that is blood. And therefore, God said, I'm going to teach you a lesson for hurting the Jewish people, for hurting the future babies to come out and who ended up turning into blood, your life source. We're going to punish you with blood as first. Also, the Nile was definitely a kosher mikveh. They did not let the women go to the mikveh either, which also withheld the Jews from having children. So you know what? That place, we're going to turn that to blood to teach you a lesson. The third is to pay back the Egyptians for throwing the innocent Jewish boys into the Nile River, which was definitely spilling their blood. So you know what? All of that blood that's sitting at the bottom of the Nile River, all that's going to take everything over, and that whole thing is going to be blood. The fourth reason is to pay Paro back for slaying innocent Jewish babies, to make blood baths daily for him because he was plagued with leprosy. He had a horrible skin condition. Great for us. Unfortunately, not great for us because that his great advisors, which were definitely wrong because it wasn't working, said the only way to cure your skin would be for you to soak in blood. And guess what? There's a special ingredient in Jewish baby blood. Not. But that's so sad, horrible. So for those 4 reasons, the Nile was attacked first, and with none other than blood being its plague. Having given that introduction, there's a verse in this week's Torah portion. It is in chapter 7, verse 21. You can find that on page 322. Chapter 7, on 326. Page 326 in the art scroll, it says as follows. V'hadaga asher bayor meta. That all of the fish in the Nile River died. Vayvash hayeor. And the Nile spoiled, it stunk. Can you imagine dead fish in bloody water? Horrible, horrible. And we know that the Egyptians were not able to drink water from where they normally used to get their drink of water from. The Zera Shimshon quotes a midrash. The midrash tells us that the Jewish people became extremely, I'll say it one more time, extremely wealthy from the plague of blood, the very first plague. Why? We mentioned because they sold water to Egyptians so that they can drink. So can you imagine one whole week? And I'm sure there was a recovery time at the same as well. But at least one whole week of you being nonstop busy with packing bottles and selling bottles, packing and selling, and packing and selling, and raking it in, cha-ching, 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 non-stop, right? Like the dip jar, non-stop, jing, 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 non-stop, okay? They really, the Midrash says, became extremely wealthy. Comes the Zera Shimshon, and he says, how does this Midrash learn that idea from the Pasuk? Normally a Midrash, although they are Midrashic teachings, and normally sometimes they are more far-fetched than others, but this one, the Zera Shimshon says, seems to be very far-fetched. It says, V'adaga shebayor meta, that the fish died. And the Midrash is on this Pasuk telling us, the fish died, and you know what? The Egyptians had to buy water from the Jews, and the Jews became so very wealthy. What's the correlation with that specific with the next? Meaning, if I recall correctly, that's exactly the Zera Shimshon's question. Why specifically on the words Ve'adaga asher bayor metu, that the fish died in the Nile? From there, we see that the Jews became very wealthy from selling water. So listen to what the Zera Shimshon says. Amazing. Later on in Parashat Beha'alotcha, I'm not going to make you look at it. I'll just quote it for you. It's in Bamidbar, in Numbers 11:5. The pasuk says, "Zacharnu et hadaga asher achalnu Mitzrayim chinam." I remember the fish. I'm going to read it. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt free of charge. What's that talking about? Okay, so the Jewish people are out in the wilderness. And what does every Jew know how to do well? Who? Complain! Of course, complain. Kvetch, as they say in Arabic, right? Every Jew knows how to complain. So guess what Moses had an earful for most of the 40 years of the traveling in the wilderness with the amazing complaining Jews. Okay? Just complaining more and more and more and more and more and more. Some of us say, oh, that sounds like our children. Others say, that sounds like our parents. That sounds like my wife. That sounds complaining, okay? All Jews complain. Now, you know what they're complaining about? Well, let's get to that's like the cherry on the top, okay? They're complaining, there were graves, Moses. There were enough graves for us in Egypt. What do you need to bring us out here to die? Moses, you know what I want? I liked the food we ate there. I liked the specific. I'm quoting some of the specific. The watermelons, there we go, remember? The leeks, the onions, the garlic, and there was zucchini. I'm not a big fan, but anyways, the zucchini. Okay. And the fish! We remember the fish! And by the fish it says we remember the free fish. Like freedom fries, okay? The free fish! We remember those. Free fish? Shimshon says, what's free fish have to do with anything? Listen to what he says. He says, the Egyptians, as evil as they were, they did give a little bit of leeway to the Jews. Remember, they were so mean. We said last week, all they fed the Jews was matzah. Why matzah? Because a little bit of matzah keeps you going all day. And believe me, you don't need any bathroom breaks because you can't go. Okay? So that was perfect. It was cheap. It was fast to make. It was non-perishable. It was like everything you could want all in one to be your slave's food. But you know what they did allow them? They allowed them to fish freely and take any of the fish that they caught and eat it. And they didn't charge them for it. Oh, such nice Egyptians. Well, in merit of the Egyptians actually doing that, they had the opportunity of buying water. But that's besides the point. Listen to the way Zera Shimshon explains this. The Zera Shimshon says that when the Jews are having their fish that they're allowed to catch for free, that was their, let's call it supper. They had matzah for middle of the day meal, and their dinner was fish. What happens when the Nile becomes full of blood and the fish inside die? Who suffers? The Jews or the Egyptians? Answer both. The Egyptians have no water and the Jews have no more fish, no more free fish. They now have a lack of income. Their source of their evening meal is now no longer there. So what did God do to recompensate for that? Was he said, you know what you're going to do? You're going to take the water, sell that, and with that money you'll be able to purchase any food you want. It was a great gift for the Jews. So that's why the Zera Shimshon says, the very verse that tells us the fish died in Egypt, in the Nile River from the blood, on that part of the verse, the Midrash is telling us that the Jews were able to sell water, and with the water they made a lot of money and they became very wealthy. Because that wealth was an answer for them losing their fish. It was harder for them to lose fish than to the Egyptians to losing fish. And that's what fits out. Now the tremendous lesson from this is amazing. That God is so calculated in everything he does, when he closes one door, he opens at least one more, if not many more. Right? What would you prefer, fish or cash? I don't care how much you love fish, even if you like Moroccan fish, right? Fish or cash? Joel!
Take the cash.
There we go!
Buy all the fish you want.
Exactly! You could buy fish, you could buy anything you want with that money. So it was a great merit to God, merit to the Jewish people from God. So this is a great lesson to us, even with all the chaos the Jewish people were enduring, and the great miracles that they were enduring in and witnessing in the land of Egypt. God closed one door, but he opened up multiple doors for them. He does so too in our lives. In our lives, sometimes we need to look back in order to cope with the present, okay, and to look forward to the future. But if we look in the past and we see doors that were closed for us, relationships, health maybe, places, jobs, business opportunities, and some of those doors were opened and opened wider, and some of those doors were closed. When we look back, and we look back at the last year, the last 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years, let's see, however old you are, and you say, well, thank God I went to this school, and I met these people, and I met my spouse, and I married this person, and not that person, and all of the things that happened in our lives, those doors were closed, but you should know that before that door was closed, God, either simultaneously before that, already opened at least one, if not many more. And that's something that should be very reassuring to strengthen our faith. That in the present, when it looks like all doors are closed, being closed, know that there are many doors that are open. We just need to locate them and walk right through them because God has prepared them for us. This we learn from when the fish died. Hashem gave so much more to the Jews. He allowed them to sell water in order to have that great wealth. But now let's take the fish for a moment. Why did the fish need to die? What did the fish do so wrong that they deserve to die? The Mamlo has asked this question, and he gives a couple answers. Let's find where they are. All right, here they are. Again, it's Sunday night, okay? I only had a couple hours. All right. Answer number 1. Simple answer. To prove that the Nile really turned to blood, and it wasn't a magic trick, the fish had to die. because if the fish would have survived in the water, then in the colored water, well, then they would know, okay, it's fruit coloring or whatever, and then they would survive. So in order to prove that it was really blood and it wasn't a magic trick, the fish had to die. That's number one. Number two, the fish at this point were being punished. Why would the fish being punished? Well, if you remember in the time of the flood, in the time of Noah, the fish did not die. They did not sin. God is very exact in who gets punished for what they do. Since they did not sin, they did not get punished. But by the way, this time, they did something very wrong. They did sin. What was that? They ate the babies that were being thrown into the river. So God punished them for what they did wrong. Okay? But now I'm going to give you an interpretation that when I read this was last year, I read it for the first time, I literally got up and fell off my seat. Okay? Because this is something that we're all going to be able to relate to, and some of us maybe more than others. Some people are very in touch with their taste. Okay? Most of us can taste the difference between this type of water and that type of water, right? But if someone is given like 10 different types from 10 different springs, maybe you could put them in 2 or 3 different categories. The truth is that every spring of water, every body of water has specific properties and elements in them, and those properties change the taste in the water. They change the nutritional facts, they change the taste, the density, the pH balance, the osmosis, reverse osmosis, all of those cool things, okay? Now, what is the reason for the different taste in water? So, many of us would say, okay, maybe it's the earth it's in, the type of salt that's in it, the rocks, the vegetation. The Zohar says it's something different. The Zohar says it's the animal life, the fish life that is in the water that determines the taste and determines the nutritional facts of the water. Having said that, okay, depends on what type of fish there is. Having said that, water plays a very great role in the human body, physically. Physically, we know we are comprised of, is it around 70% water-ish? Yeah, is that the number? Do we have any, yeah? Okay, everyone agrees? Okay, Google might say different, I don't know. Okay, 70%-ish of water. That's a great amount of, at least proportionally, that our body is comprised of. That means the water has a great impact on us. The Zohar says, do you know why the Egyptian people were so torturous to the Jewish people and so mean to us? It's because the water they were drinking was, you want to say, making them, influencing them to be brutal, animalistic people. And that fault was partly the fault of the fish. And that's why they were being punished. So maybe you want to say that's a long shot, but to us it's very applicable that when you take a Zephyrin Hills spring, and you take, I don't even know all of them, you take DeSanti, Aya, Eya, all of these, what are the any ones? Olin Springs, all of them. Evian, okay. Everyone has their favorite brand, right? Costco, Kirkland brand. Everyone has their own brand they like, and you get used to it, okay? Eden, okay, May Eden in Eretz Israel. Even in Israel, by the way, in Israel is one of the places you taste the difference of the water the most. Yes. Okay? You can buy a bottle, sometimes the cheaper bottle tastes so much better than the more expensive bottle, and sometimes when it's cold it tastes different than when it's room temperature. The water in Israel is definitely miraculous, okay? Just to put it out there. And for that reason, the fish, that is the third reason why the fish were being punished. So either because they were being punished for eating the babies, they were a proof that it was really blood, or it was their fault for influencing the Egyptian people based on the, you want to call what they were secreting into the water that got into the Egyptians and started influencing them to be brutal human beings.
Okay. Israel drank it also.
Who?
But the Jews drank that also.
Maybe that also attests to how come they went to such a low spiritual. That strengthens it. Very good. Okay. Next. Thank you. Speaking of water. Very good. All right. Now we're going to wrap it up with an interesting study on the plagues. So most of us look at the plagues, as I said, you can take each plague and spend at least 1 hour on each plague. Minimum, like entry level to understand one plague is 1 hour per plague. Thank you. That's like 10 hours. Okay? But there's another type of study of the 10 plagues which opens up our minds to a new novelty. And that is, how about studying them as one whole unit and seeing if there are any algorithms in the process in which the plagues were carried out, how and where, and maybe even why they were carried out. Okay? This is a long concept. We have only 5-ish minutes left. I'll try to abbreviate it as much as possible, but what I'm about to say tonight is something which many don't know about and many don't have a chance to learn about, because when you're reading, it's obvious. It's when you're reading about the 10 plagues, you're focusing each one, each word, each verse on its own, because it's so impactful and it's so exciting. But sometimes, even when something's so exciting, you need to take a step back and take a bird's eye view and look at all of the 10 plagues together. So listen to a couple of case studies which were proven true with a method in the progress of the 10 plagues. Okay. Firstly, there was only a reason given for why each plague was given or brought onto Paro only before the first plague, that's blood, before the fourth plague, just so we just keep it fast, before the fourth plague, which was wild beasts, and before the seventh plague, which was hail, barad. Okay? Only 1, 4, and 7. Before those, God told Moses to give a reason why. The first one was in order that Paro and his people know that he is God. If that's not good enough, okay, the second time around, to know that God is Be'kerev ha'aretz. God is here and involved in the world, involved in this land. It's not just you, Paro. It's not making it up. And the third, right before the seventh plague, the third lesson was that Hashem is the one and only. But if we look at the other 7 plagues, there's no reason to why God is bringing it. Okay? So the first, for 3 plagues, that's 1, 2, and 3, has 1. 4, 5, and 6 has that second reason. And then the last segment, which is really 4 instead of 3, has a completely different reason. Okay? But I want us to pay attention to something else. The first plague, Paro is warned for. The second plague, Paro is warned for. The third plague, lice, Paro is not warned. God doesn't tell Moses, go warn him. Okay, so if that would be something interesting, it should continue. Okay, the fourth plague, Paro is warned for. The fifth plague, Paro is warned for. The sixth plague, not warned. And then it happens again. The seventh plague, he's warned. The eighth plague, he's warned. The ninth plague, he's not warned. So that means every 3, Paro is not being warned. So at the beginning of every 3, as we know, Rabbi Yehuda, we say this in our Haggadah, he tells us Detzach, Adash, and Bachav. Okay? He takes these 10 plagues and he gives us an acronym to them. He takes the first letter of each. What's the big idea? What great chidush, what great novelty is that? So you took, instead of remember 10 words, you need to remember 10 letters. So what? So it's because each of these are really a segment and a message in them of themselves. Before each of these groups, there's a reason why it's being brought. The last one of each of these groups, or really the third one of each of these groups, there's no warning to. Why is there no warning? That's not fair. Let's give Paro a fair chance to turn around. Maybe he would have turned around after number 7 instead of after number 10 if we would have warned him each time. So why is he not being warned? This question the Zera Shimshon asks. This question the Malbim also asks. I want to give you the Malbim's answer first, and then we'll end off with the Zera Shimshon's answer. The Malbim says as follows: that there's a concept in the Talmud, in Jewish law, that al pi shnaim edim yakum davar, that 2 kosher witnesses can prove something, can decide something, can cause a real ramification and consequence. To the point where there's no difference between 2 or 3. Once you have 2 good ones, it's good. The Talmud says, Trei kemea. 2 witnesses is like 100 witnesses. There's absolutely no difference. When they were cross-referenced and checked to know that they are saying the absolute truth, 2 witnesses is worth everything. Okay? So, the Malbim says, the first 2 plagues in each of the segments were as if God was coming with witnesses to warn Paro. I'm warning you with blood. Didn't get it. Okay, that's witness number 1. I'm warning you with frogs. Witness number 2. He didn't get it. Okay, let's say you didn't get it. we're gonna knock you down. Third one. No chance. No warning. Let's try this game again. You don't get it. Let's do it now. Okay, fourth plague. We'll warn you. Witness number 1. 5th plague. We'll warn you. Witness number 2. You didn't get it, so you're not getting a warning for number 6. And the same thing happened with the 3rd segment. Okay? That would mean that the first 2 of each segment were coming as warnings, and the Malbim explains that the 3rd one in each segment was a punishment. Having said that, we say daily a verse from Nehemiah the prophet. It said in Vayvarech David, to those who read the daily service in its entirety, it happens to be that we say this right after the Hallukas, Ashrei and all the other psalms, and right before we read the Az Yashir, after the Jewish people emerge out of the Sea of Reeds and they sing to God. What's wedged in between the psalms and the Az Yashir? This Vayvarech David, which is a quick synopsis of our Jewish history and the great things God did for us. So look how Nehemiah quickly gives a one-liner of the occurrences of the Jewish people and the Egyptians on their way out of Egypt. Look at this. Vatiten, and God gave. Otot umofetim, signs and wonders. Befaro, to Paro, uvchol avadav, and to all of his servants and his advisors and his nation. Okay? If I were Nehemiah, and I'm not, okay? If I were a prophet and I'd be trying to explain what God brought onto the Egyptians, I would say, Vatiten makot befaro uvchol avadav, that God brought plagues onto the Egyptian people. Not that he brought signs and wonders. What's a sign and a wonder have to do with a plague? Listen to the interpretation. This I heard from Rabbi Mansour. Rabbi Mansour says, a fascinating interpretation. He says that otot signs, those are the witnesses. That was the first 2 plagues in each segment. Vatiten otot, God brought witnesses as signs. Wake up, Paro, it's not going to be good for you. Sign 1, sign 2. You didn't get it? Mofet, a wonder comes. That's the punishment. Okay, first segment, second segment. Again, otot, 1 and 2. Number 3, mofet, punishment. Boom, wonder. And that was the sequence. And then if we continue, what is he saying? Befaro uvchol avadav. Just say, and all of Egypt. So listen to this amazing interpretation. Rabbi Mansour says that if we look at how he was warned, how the Egyptian people were warned, the first, pulling it out here, the first, the 4th, and the 7th, Paro was warned alone out by the Nile. God tells Moses, go to meet Paro at the Nile. This week, we have all week to study it, okay? When you're reading the plagues, try to see, where is this happening? Why is this happening? Is something happening? Is something missing? So 1, 4, and 7, God tells Moses, go see Paro out by the Nile. Alone. That's Vatiten otot umofetim befaro. First Paro. Second in the segment, when there's a warning, you know where that warning is? God tells Moses, go to the palace, where Paro's there with his avadav, with his slaves and advisors. The third one, no warning. And that's the explanation for this verse in Nehemiah, that God gave witnesses, which is the otot, and the signs, and then mofetim, the wonders, which is the punishment, to the Egyptian people. So in short, the Malbim's answer is that the reason why the third in each segment, which is again Numbers 3, 6, and 9 of the plagues, those ones are not given a warning, because they were coming as punishments for not picking up on the 2 previous signs, the 2 previous witnesses. Good? That's the Malbim. It's fascinating, and it's Min Hashemayim. It's Baruch Hashem that it's the beginning of the week that we do have all week to learn this parasha. So open up your Chumash, read the Hebrew, read the English, look at the Rashi, refer back to the class, because really a lot of beautiful things can be seen when you look at them all at once. Now let's listen to the Zera Shimshon's answer. With this we will finish. The Zera Shimshon tells us that, and this is something very new, okay? He says that plagues 3, 6, and 9, which was lice, boils, and darkness, kinim, shchin, and choshech, okay? These 3 plagues did not have a warning for a different reason. He quotes the Yalkut Ruvini, which is a midrash, who says in the name of the Sefer HaPeliyah, another older book, that he says that for these 3 plagues, plagues 3, 6, and 9, they actually encompassed the other 2 as well. That means, and the 3rd plague, when kinim, lice, was coming, it wasn't just lice. It was lice and boils and darkness, which is very easy to put those all together, right? There's a lot. When there's swarming lice, well, then it's dark. And when you have constant lice and you're scratching and itching, well, that brings boils. They all really fit one another. And then a 6th plague, when boils came, that came along with lice and darkness too. And darkness really also had lice and boils. They all incorporated. The only thing is that number 3, the 3rd plague, the main one was lice, and then it had the other 2. And the 6th plague, the main one was boils, and it had the other 2. And darkness was the main 9th plague, and it had the other 2 as well. So why the Zera Shimshon says, can God not tell Moses to warn Paro? Listen to this. He says, if Moses would have came to warn Paro before the 3rd plague, hey, listen, you just had blood, you just had frogs. Can you trust me that we really could bring on these plagues, that my God is the real deal? Can you trust me? Imagine Paro would have said, no, I can't. So he says, you know what, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to bring lice. God's going to bring down lice very heavy on you. And then imagine Paro says, go, test me, try it. What would come down? Not only lice, but lice and boils and darkness. So Paro, as stubborn as he was, he'll come back and say, Moses, that wasn't your God that did it. It wasn't just lice. There was more to it that came. The Zera Shimshon says, in order that Moses' warning can be 100% true, God told him, don't warn him for plagues 3, 6, and 9, because 3, 6, and 9 really incorporated each other. You say, wow, how does that really work? Listen to how the Yalkut Ruvani brings it. If anyone would take, I have a pen on me, let's do this all together. Where's my pen? All right, look at this. Let's take those 3 plagues, okay? And we're going to put them in a box. We're going to write them one on top of another, okay? So, kinim. I'm not going to do a sofit letter, okay? Chaf, nun, mem, okay? Then under that, shechin, shin, chet, nun. And then choshech, chet, shin, chaf. Did everyone see that? Kinim, okay? Shechin, choshech. Good? Now look at this. It's read horizontally, but they're also so intertwined and so all come as a package, they're also read vertically. Look at this. I can't really see. 1 second. Okay. Ki nim shechin choshech. Did everyone see that? Again.
Wow.
Ki nim. Okay, it's not me. Okay. Ki nim shechin choshech. Ki nim shechin choshech. To prove to us that all 3 of these came as a bundle, one complete square. Wow. So numbers 3, number 6, and number 9 all came together. The only reason why God told Moses, don't warn for these, is because Paro's going to come back and say, it wasn't really your God that did it. It was something else. It's like the 10th plague. The 10th plague, he came and he tells him, Kachatzot halayla. Like, we just learned this in Daf Yomi a week ago, like around the time of midnight, the firstborn will be slain. Why? Does God have a doubt when the time of midnight is going to be that the firstborn is going to die? No. You know why he told him that? Because the Egyptian advisors and the watchtellers and stargazers, they don't know exactly how to calculate it. So if it will happen at 11:55 or at 12:05, they're going to say, you were wrong. All the firstborns died, but they're going to say, you were wrong. So in order to not give a petach, as we say in Hebrew, to give an opening for the Egyptians to say, you're really wrong, your prediction didn't come true, therefore, similar to the passing of the firstborn, so too by plagues 3, 6, and 9, God told Moses, actually don't go and send a warning, not to set yourself up to have to answer another ridiculous claim in question. All this to tell us that God came through tremendously when it came to the 10 plagues, and saved us as his nation, took us as his chosen nation, and that was the beginning of us coming out into the wilderness and receiving the Torah, which was supposed to be the quickest springboard to receive the land of Israel, which had a little bit of a detour, which we will speak about in this book, and maybe most of the remaining of the book of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. So thank you everyone for coming. May we have a great blessed week. May the Zera Shimshon bless us all for coming and starting off the week with his great wisdom. Thank you everyone for coming. See you next Wednesday.